Hi everyone. Coming to you this week a bit earlier. I know that last time I tried it at 1:30, didn't have anyone show up. So I thought maybe this time get somebody here, but that's fine. I will share this information with you anyway. For a week 4 discussion, we have the themes of life, love, health, and the human condition. This ties to a little bit to our challenge 3, which is due this week, also to the discussions that you have assigned. So let's just get to it real quick. I don't want to keep it too long on this. How does the concept of cost of failure impact Duhigg's framework? This is a question I like to ask a lot of students because when they do the write-ups, they tend to say, well, I drop back into my old habits fairly quickly. And that of course is tied to what's at stake in trying to change your habit. If you're trying to give up gum chewing, for example, it's not a life or death situation most of the time. Whereas the example I like to use is of a rural community, like say, for example, of indigenous peoples in the Brazilian Amazon, where their fishing holes dry up because of global warming, and so they're forced to adapt to a new way of getting protein resources. And that means a change in habits, means waking up earlier, getting to where the limited watering holes are, where the animals are so they can hunt. It means that maybe they're not going every day hunting, maybe they're hunting for bigger game animals that they can kill one and smoke the meat and have enough meat for a month or two. So if they fail in changing their new habits, if they're not able to adapt, they don't figure out how to hunt or anything, that the cost of failure is enormous. And so the idea of failure can also be a reward that say, hey, you know, I didn't fail, and so we're able to survive. That's something you should take into consideration in your write-ups. Then now another thing I like to do is to ask why certain societies and cultures that no longer exist did they somehow fail to adapt. This ties into a bigger concept that I won't get into in too much detail now, called panarchy, about how when you get into a catastrophic failure of your system, if you're unable to adapt, it collapses. And I think it's kind of appropriate sometimes, especially with the idea of limited fuel resources, how much we depend on petroleum, for example. Also global warming, people concerned with the overall temperature increase on Earth. How is that going to impact agriculture? How the population explosion is impacting unlimited food resources. If we fail to adapt, what's in store for us? And the photo I have here on the side is a depiction of Neanderthals, which we now know through years and years and years of research that Neanderthals did have cultural traits, and yet they collapsed and disappeared. Was that a failure to adapt, or did they adapt? We all know that most of us have at least 1% Neanderthal DNA. So that's something to take into consideration as well. Next slide here. Some of the considerations you need to think about are the cultural ones, and what role others in our social unit, like our family, our peers, our community, have in making us change or adopt a new habit. If you want to adapt a new habit, how is that going to impact others? And how is their reaction going to impact your success or your failure? Are you getting the support you need from your family? Classic example is someone trying to give up smoking in a household full of smokers. Are they going to smoke around you still? Is that going to make it harder? Are they going to try to quit with you and you're going to rely on each other? All these things can impact how successful adaptations are. And I use smoking at the individual level. Think about society. If one community decides to go green, but everyone else around them, all the other ones are still using diesel fuels, fossil fuels, or are not doing anything to preserve the environment, how are they impacting your ability to succeed in the adaptation? It's important to remember that many of the influences that we have are instilled in us without us even realizing it's happening. You look here, you have a guy from the Civil War, his son who fought in the Spanish-American War, this guy's grandson fought in World War One, and his great-grandson fought in World War II. Is there something in them? Did they feel a sort of calling or pressure within the family to serve in the military? All these things have a role. Family that grew up, a child who grew up in a family of pacifists who don't believe in warfare fighting, they might not become a soldier as easily. And then also we have to wonder, how much does culture play a role in or limit what our habits may be? And I said, think about chopsticks. I know a lot of people learn to use chopsticks, but when you use them, do you actually use them for everything, or do you use them just when you're eating Asian food, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese? Do you use chopsticks when you're eating spaghetti or ravioli, or if you're eating a bratwurst? A lot of people probably don't. One of the things that was hard for me when I was living in Brazil is when I had to eat this what looks like a soup. It's called tacacá. It's a broth made out of manioc with a kind of spicier kind of leaf that we call jambu. It actually kind of numbs your mouth, and shrimp. And you can kind of see it on the side here. This is a stick. They don't eat it with a spoon. What they do is they'll stab a shrimp and scoop up some of the leaves around it and eat it like that until there's just the broth left. Then they'll pick up the bowl called a cuia, and they'll drink the broth. And the first time I got it, I'm looking around, okay, where's the spoon? And there's no spoon. They don't eat it with a spoon. If you eat it with a spoon, they look at you. I mean, you feel kind of awkward, which we'll get to in a little bit here, the idea of feeling awkward. Awkward familiarity. Let's look at this idea of familiarity. What's familiar to us, what we consider, for lack of a better word, what the first word that would jump to our minds, normal, which of course, as we now know, normal varies from culture to culture. How are perceptions of others? Are they beautiful, healthy, attractive? How all these things can kind of tie together. These are some of the points we're going to go over for our discussions. And why do we find beauty, health, and attraction the way we do? Okay. And can our cultures impact these perceptions? Or do these perceptions impact our cultures? And can technology impact these perceptions, and in what ways? Let me see here. And so some of the questions I want you to think about: what is the cultural function of a university in your own culture? American culture, we often look at universities as having the university culture. It's more than just a place where you go to school. We have campus life, we have events, we have social organizations like fraternities and sororities, clubs. There's health centers where we go to use. Of course, we have the sporting events where we put on different colored shirts than the people we're playing the sport against. And we do, as Jerry Seinfeld used to say in his comedy routine, we boo the clothing of the other team. All this is part of the university culture in the United States. In Brazil, it's not like that. They don't have sports teams in their universities. People don't live on campus, like generally speaking, like they do here in the United States. That has changed a little bit in Brazil. They don't have mascots. You just go to school. It's an institution where you go to learn, you do your homework, you go home. One of the students I had in the previous term observed, I definitely think this class would really flourish if we could hold our conversations in person. Do you agree? Is it easier to talk by email or over Zoom, or do you think you could get more out of the class by meeting in person? And what about your other classes? Is that true? I know during the pandemic, a lot of classes went online that normally aren't online classes. Do you feel that this has detracted from your learning ability, and has it detracted from your own culture? And did it help at least fill the void a little bit? I mean, I had classes where we worked on Messenger, where we typed in our comments and our answers for an hour and a half. That was an interesting experience. Anyway, and social media has a huge impact on the society we live in. It completely controls everyone's daily lives if they have chosen to have it. That's another student made this comment. Do you agree with this comment? Has social media become a huge part of our lives? And does it impact our lives? Completely control us? Do we always think about, okay, I just got my vaccine, I'm going to go post a picture of myself outside of the shot holding up my vaccine card? I'm cheesy, I know. Does it impact the lives of those who do not have it? We see here an Amazonian shaman, very good friend of mine. He recently passed away, but when he wasn't doing his rituals for people, he would put this away and get his cell phone and start checking things. Excuse me. Excuse me. Okay. And over time, I feel people would see that not having their cell phone on actually opens up a world so much more for discovery. Is this true? Can you learn more about the world without your cell phone in your hand, without your tablet? And do we restrict ourselves, on the other hand, by not having access to images instantly on our phones from around the world? You're probably watching this on the computer right now. You're seeing this Amazonian culture come to you live through your computer. If you didn't have that access, would it restrict your world? Now, think about what a world is. World and planet are not necessarily the same thing. Okay, but taking that into consideration, the idea of having social media and technology can impact even those who do not normally have it. And that's an idea that goes in with panarchy, which you have a household which exists in a culture, and that kind of culture or society or that town or whatever exists within a nation of people, and that nation of people exists on a continent of nations within other Western cultures, and then everyone in the world impacts at a different level. This is a really good book. I'll talk about that here a little bit. We have the deeper connections, and some people have stated it's easier to connect with others online, and others disagree. Still, others feel that connections online are more superficial. Do you lose something? What's more important in cultural life to you? Having many less in-depth connections or a few more personal connections? And they're both important. All this is important because our cultural perceptions are transmitted from person to person. If you are watching, for example, a TV show and you think that an actress or an actor is good looking, you go online, you look up their name, and then you post on there, hey, I was watching her, what's her name? Oh, okay, there she is. Wow, okay. You start talking about it online with your friends on chats or whatever. It's just one silly example. But that idea of you thinking her attractive and discussing what attractive, or thinking him attractive, and discussing this with friends and peers and family through social media is transmitting cultural perceptions. And where these perceptions come from? Well, do we try to create a false reality through social media, a blurred reality? When we see TV shows and we see images of people and we think, okay, so-and-so is good looking, I want to look like that. So you take a picture, you don't like the picture, so you get on Photoshop and touch it up a little bit, or you pose for your picture even without the Photoshop. You get the picture. Oh, I don't like that, retake it, retake it, retake it. That is that projecting a false sense of reality, a false sense of who you are in your situation? And are you doing what actors and actresses doing? This is what we call kind of a dated, I know some of you are going to call me a boomer for this, but that's fine. The Gilda phenomenon. Gilda was a famous movie. The main character was played by Rita Hayworth, who back in the 1940s and 50s was considered the beauty of the age. And she was famous for saying that they go to bed with Gilda and they wake up with me. They find out that Rita Hayworth was not Gilda. They have this idea of the fantasy of the idea of the ideal person they thought they were getting, and then they would find out the reality is not what they were expecting in the morning. And has it gotten worse as social media has grown? Have we taken what people used to objectify movie stars or television stars or media personalities? Have we done that to ourselves through technology? Are we creating a false image and an impossible standard for ourselves? Think about that when you do your discussions. One thing I often ponder is if technology continues to advance, which it will, of course, and social media develops and strengthens, how will in-person interactions change? Will we be more distant than we are now? This ties into the idea of the superficial, one-off bullet statements, interacting with people on Facebook or Snapchat or whatever everyone's using these days. Is it going to be more superficial? Are we going to be talking less and less to each other, having really important, meaningful conversations, getting into that deep conversation that we did during week 1? This is an excellent question. Will our culture suffer as a result? Think critically about that. How does culture change with these one-off, easy, talking online conversations as opposed to sitting down with somebody in their living room and just talking face to face, or going out with Brazilians are famous for this. They'll go out to these little food truck places where they have a bunch of tables in the middle and they'll hang out for hours. There's no loitering laws in Brazil. So they hang out for hours and they talk. That's something we can't do here in the United States. It's going to a restaurant, going to a bar, something like that. They try to get you in and out as quickly as can if you're not ordering. So do we lose with having the face-to-face conversations and just having everything online? And does this social media feed globalization? As we expand these more interactive talks with people, we might lose some of the depth, but we definitely increase the quantity. I'd say I have, I don't know, 800 or some odd number of friends on Facebook. I'm willing to bet that about 60% of them are not from the United States. Most of them are from Brazil or from Europe, some Asians, Australians, New Zealanders, pretty much everywhere. So do we transmit this culture between each other? I know it definitely has impacted me over the years. Of course, I'm a big soccer fan. I'm a big sports fan. I'm wearing an NFL jersey here, but my favorite sport is soccer. And over the years, I have started taking on the English way of talking about the game of soccer. I struggle sometimes to call it soccer, wanting to call it football, and using the team name in the plural instead of the singular. It's something I picked up mainly from hanging out with my British friends. So that has influenced me across social media, especially because I talk to them every day on social media. I don't see them as often as I might see American friends. So something to also consider, ponder. Now, thinking about health, let's think about what a disability is. How do you define disabled as an idea? Is it something you can define? Can disabilities vary from one culture to another? How? In what ways? And that goes into the idea of what good health is and what's considered healthy. And I guess you could also say the word productive. Are you able to function in society? I'm not saying that's a good answer. That's my answer. It can vary for everyone else. How do you define what is productive within a society? How do you consider someone who can't do everything that everyone else can do, but can still do other things? Are they productive? Are they disabled? Are they differently abled? As the expression, I don't know if it's still used, but I know a lot of people say they're differently abled. They're able to do things and still remain a productive member of society. And does this idea vary from one culture to another? Someone who's not able to run because they have a deformed foot or something. But if they live in a fishing culture that lives on huts out on the water, they don't need to run. So are they considered disabled by that culture? They can get in and out of the boat, no problem. They can fish, they catch just as much fish as everyone else. For us, we might label them as disabled or differently abled. In their culture, that might be not even something that they look second or two times at. So that's something to consider when thinking about disabled. And how do you define healthy? We have several images from around the world here. I focused here primarily on the female ideal of beauty, but then I threw in the idea of these guys here. Let's just go through this real quick here. This is a 30,000-year-old statuette, the Venus of Willendorf, that was uncovered, that depicts what many people consider the ideal female form, was the ideal female form back in that culture at that time. It was depicted, of course, she's very large, overweight, maybe, very robust figure. Then we look here, we have a very athletic depiction of Aphrodite, the ideal female form for Greek culture. We also have here Catherine the Great, or no, I'm sorry, this is Marie Antoinette, the beauty, the ideal beauty of the 18th century. We have, of course, here the 20th century. We have Rita Hayworth again and Jennifer Aniston. And how has beauty changed over these years? Now you look over here at the football picture too. Would you say that these people are healthy? Are they beautiful? Is Gronk, the tight end for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who is way above the average weight for someone his height, he's an athlete. Is he healthy? And is that connected to being good looking, to being beautiful? And is beauty connected to love? That's another question people need to ask. And why do we often associate someone as beautiful that we also consider being in love with? How would you personally define the concept of love? Now, of course, we talk often about the idea of platonic and romantic love. Love between friends, love between potential partners for reproduction are different things, right? And what drives that? Are we looking through a cultural lens at what we consider to be healthy? Someone that is likely to help us reproduce successfully and keep the line going? Is this still an instinct? Does this happen? Think about that when you do your discussions. Is this something that is still prevalent? And is one preferable, platonic or romantic love, when deciding on marriage? Remember, romantic love for marriage is a relatively new thing, even in Western cultures. It still isn't prevalent in every culture in the world. I mean, a lot of cultures are based on love, on romantic love for marriage. But for many, 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 many generations, arranged marriages were the rule. They still are in many places of the world. I have here the image on the side here from Downton Abbey, the Earl of Grantham's daughter who fell in love with the chauffeur. And everyone looked upon that as being just a total shock. How can she do that? She's marrying beneath her station. I believe the expression was that they used. Well, they had a very good marriage until spoiler alert, until she passed away in childbirth. And so what role does physical attraction play in romantic love? Is it something that is still instinctual? Is it something that culture and instinct combine to make us see? Is physical attraction tied to cultural perceptions of health? And thus the idea that a healthy person is going to have healthy offspring and will be able to continue their line. And this is especially tied to some of the international students in our class. Is love the basis for marriage in your culture? And how long has it been the idea in our culture? Like I said, this is here as Downton Abbey. Early 20th century, these two got married. Relatively new idea, especially among some of the upper hierarchy, where they looked for the ideal marriages across family lines. Think about, I don't know if you watch The Crown at all, about the marriage between Prince Charles and Princess Diana. You know, they didn't really love each other, but they were considered an ideal match. Now, of course, we know how that turned out, but the idea that these families, these upper hierarchy families within this upper hierarchy of the British culture would want to have ideal marriages is a very cultural thing. How much of that was tied to successful continuation of the line? Something to ponder. I've got a couple more questions here for you. Have you ever traveled somewhere where you felt awkward or like an idiot because everyone was doing things differently than you? This is a part of the next discussion question. And then I think about this here. It seems like it's unrelated. It's not unrelated. It's actually very much related to it. How do you think that the testing we use in the United States, such as SAT and ACT, are reliable examinations of intelligence? How much you know? How much of that is culturally driven? Think about the IQ test too. What are some of the problems that can arise with these standardized tests? Well, we have here Bushman of the Kalahari. How well do you think they would do on a Western model IQ test? How well would they do in the SAT or the ACT? Assuming that they haven't had any formal education, most people would say, well, they would do terribly. Well, that's not their culture. They don't learn these things because learning abstract ideas and all that aren't necessarily important to these people. Whereas being able to identify a poisonous plant or identify the signs that a particular prey animal that they're hunting is frequently in that area, that's more important to them. Would you be able to do that in their culture? If they gave you a test of your ability, your skills, and according to what their culture defines, how well would you do? And this is an idea that many people often overlook, is this idea that cultural variation makes people seem to want to tie it to intelligence or ability. And it's makes us feel awkward when we're in a situation where we don't understand what's going on. I have here, just finishing up, some reading recommendations that I highly recommend. They're tied into this idea of what we're working on this week. Race is a four-letter word, the genesis of the concept. Very interesting book. I actually have it here. Panarchy, Understanding Transformations in Human Natural Systems. Very complex reading, but very good too. Sapiens, A Brief History of Humankind, talking about human cultural development over the millennia. Braiding Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge and Teachings of Plants. This is about North American indigenous wisdom. Ties in very well with the book 1491, if you've read that. It shows how people perceive things differently, and how by not perceiving things the way that we do, they often face prejudice for it or discrimination for it, and how it should not be that way, that we should appreciate how other people perceive things. And that's it. If you have any questions, please make sure you drop me a line. I'm here to answer them for you. I'm here anytime you need to talk to me. I'm available. Just drop me a line. and we'll set something up. And if you have any questions, make sure you get them to me. I look forward to seeing your discussions on the threads, and have a great week. And I'll see you all again soon.